Number, the call for aid. The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer. Ambassador Kethara of the Zephyrian Coalition pressed her four-fingered hands against the cold metal of the communication console, her crystalline features reflecting the pulsing red warning lights that had been flashing for 3 rotations now. Still no response from the Valkyrie Empire, reported Communications Officer Thane, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion that had settled over their entire diplomatic vessel. The Andromedans have formally declined. The Rigelian Defense Force sent their regrets but claim they're dealing with their own territorial disputes. Kethara's translator device buzzed softly as she muttered a curse in her native tongue. Behind her, the holographic display showed the devastating reality they faced. The Devourers had already consumed 4 worlds in the Outer Rim, leaving nothing but barren rock and cosmic dust in their wake. Each planet had been home to billions of sentient beings, now nothing more than energy absorbed by the unstoppable swarm. What about the newer species? She asked, though hope was becoming a luxury they could no longer afford. The ones from the recently contacted sectors? Thane's scales rippled with nervous energy as he consulted his records. The Aquari Federation is too far away to mount any meaningful defense. The Crystalline Collective lacks sufficient military capability. And then there are. He paused, his voice uncertain. The humans. The bridge fell silent, except for the persistent hum of life support systems. Kethara had heard whispers about this species during her diplomatic rotations. They were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 of their centuries ago. Most established civilizations regarded them as primitives, barely worth acknowledging in formal assemblies. The humans? Kethara repeated, her voice carrying more desperation than she intended. What do we know about their military capabilities? Thane's fingers danced across his console, pulling up the limited data they possessed. They call their governing body the United Earth Federation. Population, roughly 8 billion, across 12 colonies. Their technology appears primitive by galactic standards, still using chemical propulsion for many of their vessels. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no quantum disruptors. Another officer, Velish, looked up from her station with barely concealed disgust. You cannot be seriously considering asking those barbaric mammals for military assistance. Their entire species has a documented history of constant warfare among themselves. They've barely evolved beyond tribal conflicts. Kethara studied the tactical display showing the Devourer swarm's projected path. 3 more populated systems lay directly in their trajectory, including the Coalition's agricultural center that fed over 50 billion beings. The mathematical certainty of extinction stared back at her from those cold, blue projections. Their warfare experience, she said slowly, a new thought forming. Tell me more about that. Thane pulled up historical records, his expression growing more troubled as he read. Their documented conflicts are extensive. They've engaged in warfare continuously for their entire recorded history. Large-scale conflicts involving millions of combatants, weapons of mass destruction. Tactical innovations that seem to emerge from desperation rather than scientific advancement. Primitives. Velish repeated with a dismissive gesture. What could they possibly offer against a threat that has destroyed civilizations far more advanced than theirs? The question hung in the air as another alert chimed. The Devourers had accelerated their consumption rate. The projected timeline for reaching Coalition space had shortened by 37 rotations. Kethara closed her eyes and made the decision that would change everything. Open a channel to Earth. The response came faster than expected. Within 2 local rotations, a human vessel approached their position. It was an ugly thing by galactic standards, all sharp angles and exposed machinery, lacking the elegant curves that characterized advanced starship design. Scorch marks and hastily welded patches suggested it had seen recent combat. The human who appeared on their view screen defied their expectations. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen was smaller than most species Kethara had encountered. Her features delicate by galactic standards, but her eyes held a hardness that spoke of experience with violence that most civilized beings never witnessed. Ambassador Kethara, Admiral Chen began without preamble. We received your distress beacon. We understand you're facing an existential threat from an entity you call the Devourers. Admiral Chen, Kethara replied formally. I must be direct. Our situation is desperate. This swarm has consumed 4 worlds already, and our greatest military powers have either declined to help or proven insufficient to stop them. We come to you because we have nowhere else to turn. A slight smile crossed the human's features. You want to know if the crazy humans might be willing to throw themselves at an impossible enemy. The bluntness of the statement caught Kethara off guard. That is not how I would phrase it. But it's accurate, Chen said. You've tried the advanced civilizations with their energy weapons and quantum technology. Now you're asking the primitives with kinetic weapons and chemical explosives to solve your problem. Velish leaned forward, her voice sharp. If you understand the hopelessness of the situation, why did you respond to our beacon? Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Because hopeless situations are our specialty. We've been fighting impossible odds since we learned to throw rocks at predators. Every major advancement in human history has come from someone deciding that impossible just meant nobody's tried hard enough yet. She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display changed to show detailed scans of the Devourer swarm. We've been studying your data. These entities consume matter and energy, converting it to expand their collective mass. They adapt to conventional weapons by absorbing and integrating the technology used against them. Precisely, Thane confirmed. Each fleet that has engaged them has only made them stronger, which explains why your advanced friends want nothing to do with this fight, Chen nodded. They're worried about feeding their best technology to the enemy. Understandable. If you think like a rational civilization, Kethara felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. And humans do not think like a rational civilization? Ambassador, Chen said with a grin that showed far too many teeth. We're the species that looked at controlled nuclear fusion and decided our first application should be making bigger explosions. We've never let rationality get in the way of necessity. The connection continued for several more standard hours, as Admiral Chen requested detailed information about Devourer behavior, their known weaknesses, and the failed strategies employed by previous defenders. Her questions were sharp, tactical, focused on details that other military leaders had dismissed as irrelevant. You mentioned they adapt to energy weapons, Chen noted. What about their response to kinetic impacts? Thane consulted his records. Kinetic weapons showed initial effectiveness, but declining results as the entities learned to redistribute impact energy throughout their mass structure. Physical projectiles? The Andromedans attempted mass driver bombardments, effective initially. Then the Devourers developed impact-absorbing barriers. Chen nodded thoughtfully. And explosive munitions? Chemical explosives proved insufficient to penetrate their adaptive defenses. The human admiral leaned back in her chair, and Kethara could almost see calculations running behind her eyes. Finally, Chen spoke. Ambassador, I'm going to be honest with you. By any rational measure, this is a suicide mission. These Devourers have adapted to every conventional tactic, absorbed technology from civilizations far more advanced than ours, and they're growing stronger with every victory. Kethara's hope began to fade. I understand. We had to try, but I'm not finished, Chen interrupted. You see, you made one critical error in your assessment of the situation. What error? Admiral Chen's smile returned, carrying implications that made Kethara's translator struggle to convey the appropriate tone. You assumed we would use conventional tactics. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the coalition bridge in stunned silence. Within 6 standard rotations, reports began arriving from across human space. Entire fleets were mobilizing, but not just military vessels. Cargo ships, mining equipment, construction platforms, even civilian transports were being pressed into service. What are they doing? Velish demanded, as she watched the movement of human forces on long-range sensors. Kethara studied the patterns, trying to unnumber the human solution. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace looked nothing like any military formation the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chen's flagship, the UEF Indomitable, led a massive convoy that included everything from military destroyers to mining barges, from scientific research vessels to what appeared to be modified garbage haulers. Kethara watched from the Coalition observation vessel as the humans began their preparations. Instead of forming defensive perimeters or establishing firing positions, they scattered across the system in patterns that defied tactical logic. "What are they doing?" "Communications," Officer Thane asked, his voice filled with confusion as he tracked the human movements on his displays. "They're not establishing any coherent defensive formations." The largest group of human vessels had positioned themselves around the system's dying red star, while others moved toward the asteroid belt. Construction platforms deployed alongside mining equipment, beginning operations that seemed completely unrelated to the approaching threat. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel. "Ambassador, we're going to need you to move your observation vessel to a safe distance. Minimum 40 astronomical units from the star." "Admiral," Kethara replied, "that distance would prevent us from observing your defensive operations." "Ma'am, with respect, if you're close enough to observe our operations, you're close enough to become part of them. And trust me, you don't want that." The ominous tone in Chen's voice convinced Kethara to order the retreat. As their vessel moved to the specified distance, long-range sensors continued tracking human activity. What they detected made no sense according to any known military doctrine. "They're mining the asteroids," Velish reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "During an active military engagement, they're conducting mining operations." "Not just mining," Thane added, studying his readings more carefully. "They're refining materials in real time, and they're building something. Multiple somethings." The human construction effort was unlike anything the Coalition had witnessed. Instead of prefabricated military equipment, the humans were manufacturing custom devices using raw materials extracted from the asteroids. The speed of their operations suggested technologies that their initial assessments had completely missed. Meanwhile, the Devourer swarm continued its inexorable approach. Long-range sensors showed the massive entity as a dark cloud spanning several million cubic kilometers, absorbing light, matter, and energy from everything it encountered. Previous observations had documented its ability to consume entire asteroids in seconds, growing larger and more complex with each absorbed mass. "Contact in 18 standard hours," Thane announced. Admiral Chen's voice returned to their communication channel. "Ambassador, we're transmitting data packages to your vessel. These contain detailed records of our engagement strategy. If we fail, other species need to know what we attempted." Kethara felt a chill at the implication. "Admiral, what exactly are you planning?" "Something that's never been tried before," Chen replied. "Something so fundamentally stupid that no rational civilization would ever consider it." The data packages arrived, and Kethara found herself staring at specifications that challenged everything she thought she knew about physics and military strategy. The humans hadn't just brought conventional weapons. They had brought something far more dangerous. "They're weaponizing stellar engineering," she whispered, her translator struggling with concepts that existed at the intersection of desperation and madness. The human plan, as she began to understand it, involved 3 phases of attack, each phase built upon technologies that advanced civilizations had developed but never considered using in warfare, because the risks were too catastrophic to contemplate. The first phase began as the Devourer swarm entered the outer system. Instead of engaging the entity directly, the human fleet activated devices they had positioned throughout the asteroid belt. These weren't weapons in any conventional sense, but rather tools designed for the most dangerous of scientific experiments. "Gravity wave generators," Thane read from the human technical specifications. "They're creating artificial gravitational distortions." The effect was immediately visible on their sensors. Space itself began to warp around the Devourer swarm, creating gravitational anomalies that pulled at the entity from multiple directions simultaneously. The swarm, which had previously moved as a unified mass, began to stretch and deform as different sections experienced different gravitational pulls. Ingenious, Velish admitted reluctantly. They're not attacking the Devourers directly. They're attacking the space the Devourers occupy, but the swarm adapted quickly. As it always did. Individual components began separating and reforming, reducing the overall surface area affected by the gravitational distortions. Within hours, the Devourers had developed a resistance to the gravity wave attack. Phase 1 complete, Admiral Chen announced. The entity has adapted as predicted. Initiating Phase 2. The second phase involved the devices the humans had been constructing around the system's star. Kethara watched in growing horror as she realized what they intended. They're destabilizing the stellar core, she breathed. The humans had surrounded the red giant with machinery designed to inject specific particles into the star's fusion process. Not enough to cause an immediate supernova, but sufficient to create controlled instabilities that could be triggered and directed. As the Devourer swarm approached the inner system, the star began to pulse. Each pulse sent waves of specific radiation frequencies toward the entity. Frequencies that the humans had calculated would disrupt the quantum processes that held the swarm's collective consciousness together. The effect was more dramatic than even the humans had predicted. Sections of the swarm began operating independently, some moving toward the star, others retreating, some spinning in random directions. The unified intelligence that had consumed 4 worlds was fragmenting under the assault of carefully tuned stellar radiation. But again, adaptation began. The fragments started developing individual shielding against the radiation. Some began moving in coordinated patterns, despite the neural disruption. The Devourers were learning to function as separate entities rather than a collective. Phase 2, effectiveness declining, reported one of Chen's officers over the open channel. Entity fragmentation. Achieving diminishing returns. Confirmed, Chen replied. All vessels. Initiate Phase 3. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. Kethara felt her heart skip as she realized what Phase 3 entailed. The humans hadn't just planned to wound the Devourers or delay them. They had planned something that no sane civilization would ever consider. They're going to detonate the star, Thane said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not detonate, Kethara corrected, reading the technical specifications with growing amazement and terror. They're going to turn it into a weapon. The human fleet began a coordinated withdrawal, but not before deploying their final surprise. Hidden among the conventional vessels were ships carrying devices that existed at the very edge of theoretical physics. Quantum destabilization arrays, exotic matter injectors, technology that could transform a dying red giant into something far more dangerous. All Coalition vessels, this is Admiral Chen. You have approximately 43 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. The math on this one is pretty unforgiving, so I'd suggest you start moving now. As the Coalition vessel accelerated away from the system, Kethara watched the human fleet's final movements. Most of their ships were retreating as well, but several remained behind, positioning themselves between the Devourer swarm and the star. Admiral, she called over the communication channel, your ships that remained behind. Volunteers, Chen replied simply. This kind of operation requires someone to maintain the targeting systems until the last possible moment. They knew the risks. The star began to change. Colors shifted across the spectrum as the human modifications took effect. The red giant was becoming something that had never existed naturally in the universe. A stellar body whose entire output could be focused and directed like the largest weapon ever conceived. The Devourer swarm, still fragmented but beginning to reunify, approached the modified star. The entity had adapted to conventional energy weapons, to kinetic attacks, to gravitational distortions, and even to neural disruption. But it had never encountered a weapon that used an entire star as its focusing element. When the star discharged, Space itself seemed to scream. The blast was not an explosion in any conventional sense. Instead, the star released a focused beam of energy that contained the compressed fusion output of a stellar body's entire lifetime. The beam struck the devourer swarm with the force of a weapon that could crack planets. But what made the attack truly devastating was not its power, but its nature. The humans had engineered the stellar modification to produce energy at frequencies that the devourers could not absorb or adapt to. Instead of feeding the entity, the attack began breaking down the fundamental particles that composed it. "Impossible," Velish whispered as she watched the swarm begin to disintegrate. "The energy output should have made them stronger." "Not if the energy can't be absorbed," Kethara realized. "The humans created a weapon that produces energy in a form the devourers cannot utilize." The attack continued for 17 standard Me number after the storm. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council convened 3 standard rotations after the destruction of the devourer swarm. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Grand Assembly Chamber on Nexus Prime. Their conversations filled with combinations of awe, fear, and profound uncertainty about what they had witnessed. Ambassador Kethara stood at the speaker's podium, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's ceremonial lighting as she prepared to deliver her official report. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the aftermath of the human operation, images of space still scarred by energies that should not have been possible to generate or control. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying through the chamber's translation systems to reach every species present. "I come before you today to report on the elimination of the entity designated as the Devourer Swarm, and to discuss the implications of the methods used to achieve this victory." The chamber fell silent. Even the normally restless Aquari delegation ceased their constant movement as Kethara activated the primary display. The human fleet arrived in the threatened system with equipment that our initial assessments had categorized as primitive. No energy shielding, no plasma weaponry, no quantum disruptors. What we failed to recognize was that they had brought something far more dangerous. The display showed technical specifications that made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. They brought innovation born from desperation and a willingness to employ strategies that no rational civilization would consider. Senator Vexhai of the Andromedans rose from his delegation's seating area. His metallic form reflected the chamber's lighting as he spoke. "Ambassador Kethara, the Andromedan Defense Force reviewed your preliminary reports. The humans deliberately destabilized a stellar core and used it as a weapon. This represents technology that could threaten entire sectors." "Senator Vexhai?" Kethara replied. "That technology was used to eliminate a threat that your defense force declared impossible to defeat. The humans succeeded where our most advanced militaries failed. By employing methods that risk catastrophic collateral damage," interjected Representative Zil-Nara of the Velkari Empire. Her serpentine form coiled with agitation. "What happens when this species decides to use such weapons against other civilizations?" "4. -4. The question sparked immediate discussion throughout the chamber. Some species demanded restrictions on human military activities. Others argued for immediate integration of human tactical expertise into coalition defense planning. A few suggested that humanity represented a threat requiring preemptive action. Kethara raised her hand for silence. "If I may, honored representatives, I believe we are asking the wrong questions." She activated a new series of displays, showing detailed analyses of human behavior during the crisis. The humans lost 17 vessels and over 8,000 crew members in their operation against the Devourers. These were volunteers who remained behind to ensure the success of a mission they knew they could not survive. When I asked Admiral Chen about this sacrifice, her response was illuminating. The chamber listened as Kethara played the recorded conversation. "Admiral, your ships that remained behind. Volunteers. This kind of operation requires someone to maintain the targeting systems until the last possible moment. They knew the risks. The humans," Kethara continued, "did not celebrate their victory. They mourned their losses and immediately began analyzing what they could have done differently to save more lives. This is not the behavior of a species that views destruction as an end in itself. Elder Mordak of the Crystalline Collective activated his communication array. Ambassador, you speak of human casualties as evidence of their peaceful intentions. But consider the implications of their tactical approach. They were willing to destabilize a star to achieve their objectives. What prevents them from using such methods against targets they consider threatening? Keth Ara had anticipated this question. She activated another recording, this one from her final conversation with Admiral Chen. Admiral, I must ask directly. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that could threaten any civilization in the galaxy. What assurance can you offer that humanity will not become the next entity we need to fear? Admiral Chen's image appeared on the chamber's displays, her expression serious as she considered the question. Ambassador, I understand your concern. Any species that can do what we just did represents a potential threat. But consider this. We developed these capabilities specifically to defend against an enemy that threatened innocent civilizations. We could have used less dangerous methods that would have been safer for us but less likely to succeed. We chose the approach that maximized the chance of protecting others, even at greater risk to ourselves. The recording continued as Chen elaborated on human military philosophy. Every human who volunteered for this mission understood that they were fighting to protect billions of beings they had never met. Species they had barely interacted with, civilizations that had previously dismissed us as primitives. They didn't fight for territory or resources or political advantage. They fought because it was the right thing to do. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives argued that such altruistic claims were propaganda designed to disguise aggressive intentions. Others pointed out that human actions during the crisis had consistently prioritized coalition survival over human interests. Furthermore, Chen's voice continued from the recording. We're sharing all technical specifications for the weapons we developed. Every civilization that wants this knowledge can have it. We're not keeping tactical advantages for ourselves. This revelation stunned the chamber into silence. Representative Kolaves of the Rigelian Defense Force rose to speak. They are sharing weapons technology that makes them the dominant military power in known space? Yes, Kethara confirmed. Complete technical specifications, manufacturing processes, theoretical foundations, and operational procedures. Admiral Chen's exact words were, "If other species have these capabilities, they won't need to call on us for help in future crises." The implications rippled through the chamber. A species that developed overwhelming military superiority and then immediately gave it away represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Elder Mordak's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. This behavior makes no logical sense. Military superiority provides political leverage, territorial advantages, resource allocation benefits. Why would they surrender such advantages voluntarily? Kethara smiled, understanding finally dawning after her weeks of studying human behavior. Because they never wanted military superiority. They wanted the problem solved. When the Devourer threat was eliminated, they considered the mission complete. She activated a final display, showing current human fleet movements. As we debate the implications of their actions, the human fleets are returning to their home systems. They are not establishing bases in coalition space, not claiming territories, not demanding concessions for their assistance. They responded to a crisis, resolved it, and are going home. Senator Vexhigh's metallic features reflected his confusion. But they could demand anything from us now. Technology transfers, territorial concessions, preferential trade agreements. We are indebted to them for our survival. I raised this point with Admiral Chen, Kethara replied. She said something that I believe defines their species better than any technical specification or military demonstration. The chamber waited, as Kethara consulted her records. She said, "The reward for solving a problem is not more problems to solve. The reward is having solved a problem." The silence that followed was broken by Representative Thilanas of the Aquari Federation. Ambassador, are you suggesting that humans engage in warfare and risk their lives purely for altruistic reasons? I am suggesting, Kethara replied, that we have encountered a species that views conflict as a tool for protecting rather than acquiring. They do not fight to gain advantage over others. They fight to prevent others from gaining advantage over the innocent. Elder Mordak's communication array buzzed with calculations. Such a species could serve as a stabilizing force in galactic politics. Their intervention capabilities could deter aggressive expansion by other civilizations. Or, Senator Vexhai countered, they could become judge and jury for all galactic conflicts, imposing their will through superior force. Kethara shook her head. Respected representatives, I submit that we are still thinking about humans in terms of how other species would use such capabilities. The evidence suggests they think differently. She activated one final recording, this one from her concluding conversation with Admiral Chen. Admiral, the Coalition owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. How do we honor such a sacrifice? Chen's response had surprised Kethara then, and still moved her now. Ambassador, the best way to honor any sacrifice is to make it unnecessary in the future. Build better defenses. Develop early warning systems. Create cooperative agreements so that when the next impossible threat appears, you have options beyond calling the crazy humans. The recording continued. We didn't save your civilizations, so you would owe us something. We saved them because civilizations should be saved. The thanks we want is for you to be strong enough that you never need saving again. The chamber fell quiet as representatives absorbed the implications. Here was a species that had developed overwhelming military capability and used it to eliminate threats to others, then shared the technology to prevent future dependence on their intervention. Representative Zilnara spoke slowly, her serpentine form coiled with thought. If their motivations are as altruistic as claimed, humanity represents something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that develops power specifically to protect others. And if their motivations are more complex, Elder Mordak added, we now possess the same capabilities they demonstrated. The technology transfers ensure that no single species maintains overwhelming advantage. Kethara nodded. Which brings us to the decision facing this council. How do we respond to a species that has fundamentally changed our understanding of warfare, diplomacy, and interspecies cooperation? The debate that followed lasted for 17 standard rotations. In the end, the coalition reached a unanimous decision that surprised no one more than the humans themselves. Humanity was invited to join the Galactic Coalition not as a junior member or probationary species, but as a founding member of the newly established Department of Impossible Solutions. Their mandate: to develop responses to threats that conventional military and diplomatic approaches could not address. When Ambassador Kethara delivered the invitation to Admiral Chen, the human's response was characteristically direct. So, you want us to be the people you call when everything else fails? Admiral, Kethara replied, we want you to be the people who ensure that nothing ever fails badly enough to threaten innocent civilizations again. End quote. Reminter. Unquote. Well, Chen smiled that dangerous human smile. We can work with that. As Kethara's ship departed Earth's solar system, she reflected on the strange fortune that had led her to make first contact with perhaps the most unusual species the galaxy had ever known. They called themselves humans. They fought like demons. And they seemed genuinely surprised that anyone found their behavior remarkable. In her final report to Coalition Command, she wrote, Recommendation: when facing impossible odds, ask for human assistance. When not facing impossible odds, ask for human advice on how to avoid them. In all cases, never underestimate a species that considers the phrase, impossible situation, to be a personal challenge rather than a statement of fact. The devourer threat was ended. But as the galaxy was beginning to understand, humanity's most dangerous quality was not their willingness to face impossible odds. It was their complete inability to recognize that anything was truly impossible at all. Newts, When it finally ended, the space where the Devourer swarm had existed contained only scattered particles and fading energy signatures. An entity that had consumed 4 worlds had been completely destroyed. The human ships that had remained behind to maintain the targeting systems were gone as well, vaporized by the backwash of energies that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. "Target eliminated," came Admiral Chen's voice, carrying exhaustion that spoke of costs carefully calculated and willingly paid. "Threat to Coalition space has been neutralized." The communication channel fell silent, except for the static of space itself, still disturbed by the energies that had just torn through it. Dr. Stand, the logic behind the apparent chaos. Ships moved in seemingly random directions, gathering resources and equipment that made no sense for a traditional military engagement. "I believe," she said slowly, "we are about to learn why the galaxy should never underestimate a species that considers warfare an art form." The first human fleet arrived in the threatened system 3 rotations ahead of the Devourer swarm. What they brought defied every principle of advanced military science.